is up, Shark Nation? Welcome to another episode of the SharkPod with me, Luke Curry, your the guy who talks during the show. And then we've got Mark Baker out there in Glenagiri, our co-host, and we've got Gavin J. Gallagher online. How's it going, Gavin?
I'm very well today, Luke and Mark. Good to see you both.
Delighted to have you on, Gavin. Like we said, Gavin is the host of Behind the Facade podcast, all about property investing. He has huge experience in the Irish property market and abroad. We're going to dig into that as well. This one will be interesting for people who are, I think Mark Baker, I think property is a pretty big part of the Irish psyche. What do you think?
Yeah, a big area of interest for you at the moment. You won't stop going on about it. And just to let you behind the facade, Gavin, Luke is one of your biggest fans. I think big fan of the podcast.
Oh, great! I love meeting fans of the podcast. I get quite a few messages from people over LinkedIn and various sort of ways, and a guy actually just messaged me on Facebook, and he's a guy based in the UK, but he's like one of my most loyal fans. He writes to me quite a bit, saying, Gavin, I just listened to that podcast, absolutely loved that bit, and you got to write a book, man, and all this kind of stuff. So it's really rewarding from my point of view. I mean, I'm not monetizing the podcast in any shape or form. It's from my point of view, it's just, I like to put the stories out there. And I used to be called, when I was in college, I used to get this nickname as the Shanachie, the guy who tells the stories and winds, tells these great long stories and keeps everyone entertained. So it seems to be something that kind of stuck, and that's why I do it.
We're the same. Like, it was our podcast that we have not really monetized any. We tried a few different things, but sometimes we get that feedback where we did this, like during when COVID hit, me and Mark were in the first lockdown, and we did like a 90-minute podcast of business ideas. If you had just lost your job, what would you do if you had this amount of money, all that type of stuff. Then some guys from Offaly emailed us afterwards and said they were testing out some of those ideas because they'd both lost their jobs, and thanks very much for putting that out. And it was just real, like,
rewarding. It does. It rewards you, kind of just, you feel like, wow, something that I thought up and put out there, somebody's actually taken on board and is actually kind of going with it. So I find that very rewarding.
Cool. So for those people who aren't familiar with the podcast and your content and everything like that, how would you describe yourself to somebody you were just introducing yourself to? What would you say?
Well, okay, so it's a long career. It's 25 years, so it's hard to condense it into kind of 30-second elevator pitch, but I'm a real estate or property investor developer. I have experience going back to the kind of 1990s. I run a business park here in Dublin called East Point, and it's a big corporate office campus, we'll call it. And we built it. It's a family business. It wasn't built entirely by myself. It's actually part of a larger family business. But the kind of tenants that we have working in here would be Google, Oracle, Enterprise Ireland, Deutsche Bank. They're really big corporate clients. But over the years, I kind of went out and did my own thing. I used to struggle to kind of with just being sort of part of a bigger organization. I wanted to just do my own thing. I wanted to kind of, if I wanted to buy something, I just wanted to go out and buy it. I didn't want to have to go to a committee and a board and kind of talk it through and try to convince my family, we should buy this, or we shouldn't, what should we do? So I started doing my own stuff. And so I went out there, and during the crash days, during the Celtic Tiger boom, I got really, really active, and I was just super aggressive. I wanted to be rich, and I wanted to be rich quickly. And so I kind of dived in with both feet into the, borrowing lots of money and all that. And I was really successful for a couple of years. I grew my portfolio from kind of 0 to 65 million in 5 years. I just kept on hitting these home runs, and it was fantastic. And then 2008 came along, and everything collapsed, and it was a total disaster. I ended up 16 million underwater, and the banks came after me, and there's years of a story in that alone. So yeah.
So it's kind of the rise and fall and the comeback, which is always a great way to, it's kind of the hero's journey there. But like when we talk about, so we've had a few people on the podcast that kind of went through the Celtic journey, our Celtic Tiger journey as well. And it's always very interesting to us because I guess me and Mark, we grew up in our kind of family backgrounds. We didn't have any like exposure to the Celtic Tiger, or people in our families weren't really, making moves like that during it. So the only kind of experience that we had is like when I was just leaving college, it was really kind of the couple of years before I left college, it was kind of 2008, 2010, 11. I'm going out of college and everything is just dead in Ireland. Like, so we were kind of starting from a different level. But when you say that, like, it was, people are always saying that it was crazy that you could get loans for whatever you wanted and stuff like that. Was it really like that, or is there a little bit of shine put on it in hindsight, do you think, or was
No, it really was like that. I mean, it was absolutely crazy. I can go over like dozens of stories, but just the kind of the highlight story that I like to tell is that I did one deal. I think it was around about November or December of 2005, and I bought a property, and just after I kind of closed the deal and basically, I hadn't even paid for it yet. I was basically like the sale agreed guy, and we had signed a contract, but I had 6 weeks to close out the deal. And in those 6 weeks, I was approached by an agent, and he said, Gavin, it was a guy that knew me, and he had heard that I had bought the property, and his client actually asked him to go and approach me to see if I would sell the property to his client instead. That his client wanted it, hadn't been quick enough off the draw, and I secured it, and now they wanted it, and they wanted me to sort of sell it to them. So I kind of gave them the story, I've got plans for this, I'm going to make a little money on this project, blah, blah, blah. And 6 weeks after I closed the deal, so 12 weeks after that initial conversation, I put 2.5 million profit into the bank, and it was all on borrowed money. I didn't put a cent of my own money into that deal. So that gives you just an idea what was possible with no money of my own down. I borrowed the deposit. I went and then convinced the bank, give us the money to go and buy this thing. And then I basically just kept on telling the guys, look, I'm not selling it unless we can hit the profit that I hope to achieve. But it was going to take me 2 years to achieve it. And these guys were just like, okay, we'll just give you the bloody money. And that was it, bang, in the bank. And I just, that was, for me, that was like a huge, highlight of my career. And I kind of thought, geez, what's the IRR on something that you didn't put any money into and you made 2.5 million in 6 weeks? I mean, it just basically breaks calculators, and so I just, that to me though was, whilst it's the best story, it also turns out to be probably the beginning of my downfall. And it was because once you have that kind of level of success in such a short period of time, you can kind of go a bit mad and bonkers. And I had all this money there. I had done a couple of deals similar to that had produced not as much money, but similar kind of levels. And it was all kind of coming at me at once. And it was like, God, I can do anything. Like I figured out the formula for just creating money. And I solidly believed that I was going to be worth 100 million in a couple of years' time if I just keep doing what I'm doing. And so I didn't say, okay, well, let's wait till you have 100 million to have the lifestyle. Let's just have that right now. And so I went off to New York, bought a penthouse apartment. I bought a villa in Spain. I had the flashy car. I used to fly everywhere, first class or business class, whatever. And it was just, the lifestyle just got ahead of myself. And I did not envisage this 2008 crash. I mean, I kind of thought, okay, there's going to be a correction in the market, but I didn't think that it was possible that you could have a situation where your fortunes were completely turned and flipped upside down, and you end up owing the bank millions instead of being worth millions.
That's got to be that's a hard turnaround as well, because I know we've got a mutual friend in Joe Doyle, and he had a similar story. Joe was on the podcast. He's a friend of the SharkPod as well, and he really blew us away with his story as well, because we can talk about how, like, later on we're talking about investing, getting started now. He's I think a great example of someone who sees opportunity everywhere he goes, and stuff like that. But he had a similar situation where he owed the banks after the 2008 crash, but he hadn't even started the flash lifestyle yet. So I think it might have been not easier for him, but it wasn't so much of an adjustment, right? But if you're, have the villa in Marbella or whatever and stuff like that, do they say to you, they say, Gavin, we're looking at your assets here. Do you really need the penthouse? Is it that invasive, or is it just letters in the post?
It's more difficult than that, because first of all, it wasn't one bank. If it was one bank, it would be easier, but it's three banks. And then I had a fourth bank in Spain that I had a mortgage with and stuff. And so when you're dealing with that number of people involved, it becomes very difficult, because one guy says one thing and says, you got to do this. And then you're there sort of saying, okay, well, if I do that, will it matter? Because this other guy could still come after me. And so it was trying to corral all of them to agree something. And so I had, one bank was making all these demands, and I was saying, yeah, but hold on a second. If I do that, then I'm going to leave this other bank completely out of pocket. And then so they'll come after me. And so they'll, make me bankrupt. And what's the point in me sorting out your problem if it's just going to create this other headache for me over here? So it was extremely stressful. And it sometimes felt like you were banging your head against the wall. And it actually had a lot of personal cost to me, because my marriage actually collapsed as a result of all the stress and strain. I was so stressed out that I just kind of basically I couldn't deal with any kind of rows or stuff like that at home. And that kind of stuff, just blew up the whole marriage. And so it was very costly, both from a financial point of view and a personal point of view.
It's interesting then, because then on the other side of that, when you come through that, I think if anyone listens to your podcast, you do talk a lot about the mindset of being an investor and stuff like that. And when you started, I guess, to come out of that fog after a few years, did you make a decision to say, I'm determined not to get crazy again if I can get back to where I was? Or what's that transition to get back on your feet? Was it like Joe Doyle, where he just had to envision 130 grand and then he went and got it to pay off the banks in the end?
Joe's got a great story, and I really enjoy listening to Joe and talking with Joe. The thing is, in his case, he was coming from a humble background, and so it was easier probably for him to kind of shore it back. The problem with what I went through was that I had somehow allowed my ego to get wrapped up in the success that I was having. And so it makes it all the more difficult, because now you got the flashy car, you got the flashy lifestyle, and you're surrounded by people who, kind of identify you with that. And when you have to start pulling back from that, it can become quite difficult, and it can become, I suppose it can almost push you into a depression. And I was finding that it was extremely difficult to relate to people that weren't going through this. I'd moved down to Spain. I had a load of friends who were sort of multi-millionaires that weren't in the property industry. So they were, still continuing on to have this fantastic lifestyle. One of my friends had this incredible house down in Spain, and he had an Aston Martin, and he had a Lamborghini, and all of this kind of stuff. And he was like, Alan, come on, let's go out and have some fun and all this. And I was just like dealing with such headaches, and I was just like, I can't deal with this guy. It's too easy for him compared to where my head's at. So I needed to get away. So I actually went off to Dubai and to Doha and to Africa, and I was kind of on the lookout for work and opportunities to kind of start pulling things back. So I started working abroad, and I would take weeks over there, and then I'd come back and I'd have a blowout for the weekend. I'd meet my pals and we'd have some great fun and stuff like that. But it wasn't in my face like constantly while I was dealing with all these headaches. So it made it a little bit easier. But who you surround yourself with is very important. If you're surrounding yourself with a lot of people that are depressed, that'll also have a negative impact on you. So it's kind of, you got to find the balance. You got to find people who are kind of go-getters, who are in a similar position to yourself, that are aiming high and are kind of, that are somewhere where you want to kind of get to. I think you surround yourself with the people that you want to be, and but they also have to not be so far ahead of you that you can't relate to it any longer.
Yeah, that's a really good point just at the end there as well, because a lot of people, I guess, when they're networking, so they want to hang out with the people, like you said, with the Lamborghinis in Spain or whatever, but there's nothing that you could do for those people at this stage, or so there's groups that we're a part of, there's groups that I'm a part of in like the tech industry in Dublin, and everyone's kind of in and around the same level, but we're all going to, we all have a vision of where we're going to go, and I think that's a nice place to be as well. So when you I guess, how long have you been back in Ireland? Like back on your kind of feet, or back on building back here?
Well, I came back in 2015, but I was still kind of mending the fence. I mean, I still had the banks to deal with, and so it took another, I guess, probably another year and a half to kind of finalize and get them out from my hair. And I mean, it was a tough period of time. I came back to Ireland because they hit me so hard that I actually literally didn't have a penny of income coming in at all. I actually had a situation where they had this thing called the full rental sweep, and it was every penny of income that I had was swept up, and they had access to my bank accounts to do that. And so I went from having this steady income coming in from all these properties. I would pay my bills, I would pay so much towards my my rent and whatever it was, and then I'd have a bit left over, and I'd say, okay, now I'll go and pay these guys a big chunk of that to kind of keep them at bay. And they just decided that, no, we're not going to do that anymore. We're just going to take every single penny of it. And so suddenly didn't have any money for rent. I didn't have any. So I actually had to go back home and ask my brother for help. And my brother was very generous. He lives in the US, but he had an apartment or a small house in Dublin that he was renting out. And he basically took it off the rental market and just said, look, stay there until you're back on your feet. And that was really, really, I mean, humbling experience, because he had seen me with the 7-bedroom mansion and living this high life.
Yeah.
And then suddenly it's like, hey bro, I need your help. Can you bail me out here? And he could have easily turned around and said, I told you so. And no, you're not getting any help because it's your own bloody fault. And if he had said that, I probably would have said, you know what, I deserve it. But thankfully he came clean, and he came out and helped me out basically. And part of that process was actually what helped me get back on my feet, because when you kind of have to, take such a humbling experience and kind of go through that, it sheds away any kind of baggage that you have from the previous lifestyle. Your ego is shot. You've kind of got to say, okay, I've cleaned out all this bullshit that I was kind of living around and all this stuff, and I'm starting fresh. And everyone knows I'm starting fresh. And so there's no, pretending that you're still this kind of like, and that was part of the process of coming back, because once you realize nobody's out there to kind of like rescue you, you've got to make this happen yourself. You've got to go out, you got to get resourceful, you got to figure out how you're going to do, but you got to get humble as well, because no one's going to help out somebody who's still letting on that they're the big, the big cheese and the big kind of success story on the one hand, and telling these great sort of fancy stories, and on the other hand, they're kind of like they can barely afford anything,
Yeah. And I think also, like when you're talking about that, you don't want to be the guy who had all the great stories, but no kind of vision of where, these new stories will be made. You want to, that's what inspires people as well. And I think when we're talking about the property business, it seems to me that it's hard for people from the outside to understand how it even works. I've listened to some of your episodes where it seems like it requires a lot of creativity in putting deals together, seeing a different angle here. Taking something, some property development or like parking lot or something, and making it into a hotel, or having that type of vision for that. Did when you were coming up, was your kind of the thing that was making you successful, do you think that was like the creative way you looked at different projects or something like that, or was it like your ability to get capital? What would be your main kind of skill?
That's a great question. I think there's a little bit of a combination of skill sets that you develop over time. Like I studied architecture, so I came out of college with a very good idea. I could close my eyes and I could completely imagine something. So that's definitely a set of skills that helps. And so when I walk into a property, a lot of people just see, oh my God, this is not working and that's not working, and look at the state of the rear garden. I'm looking at it and I'm closing my eyes and going, oh, wow, this is going to be amazing. Like this, I can do this, I can do this. And so that was the first skill set that I developed. And that was really helpful. And I was able to go off and use that. And I bought a nice property that was in really poor condition. And I can remember going out into the back garden and it was completely overgrown. And all of the people that were looking at this property on the same day of the viewing as me, I could see them not, going into the rear garden thinking, oh, geez, look at this headache, like no chance. And I went clambering up through all the bushes and hacked my way down to the back just to see how deep the garden was. And I was like, whoa, this is a huge garden. This is going to be fabulous. And it was that kind of, being able to see it. And a lot of people, they don't necessarily see that. So I think you've got to develop that skill. And obviously training as an architect was helpful in that regard. So I think probably it's good to look at, on the internet, find projects before and after. One of my favorite programs is Grand Designs. And, they take the old shed and they turn it into this like amazing property and stuff. And I just lap that show up. I just love the creativity and the imagination to kind of do that. And so that's first of all. I didn't have any financial skills at all at the outset. And the first deal I did was in Sligo. And it was a property that I bought, and I paid 25 grand for this little site. And it was a vacant lot in a town in a place called Enniscrone. And I can remember going out, seeing the property, and sort of saying, okay, I'm going to build 4 townhouses on this property. So I went off, got the planning permission, used my architectural kind of skills to do that. And after sort of deciding, okay, now what am I going to do? Because I didn't know the whole financial side, how to raise the money from the banks and all that. So I thought, okay, I'll start off by figuring out how much I'll be able to sell each of these 4 houses. So I went to an auctioneer living in that town, and I said, look, I've designed these houses. How much will I get for each one? And he goes, okay, give me a day or two and I'll figure it out for you and come back to you. So I was waiting for him to call me back with the prices. And he came back and said, I've got a buyer for the site. And I just was like, hey, but listen, I wanted to build these and myself. And he goes, yeah, but I've got the builder that you're going to ask says he'll just buy the site from you. And I said, well, how much? 125 grand. And I can remember thinking, whoa, I just put a few months of work into this, and 100 grand is being created. And that was when I kind of blew my mind, because at the same time I was running a little architectural practice, and I was doing months and months of work for like 5 or 6 grand, And I remember thinking, well, hold on a second, half the time and 100 grand profit. So I suddenly thought, okay, I got to figure this business out a bit better. So then I started to become basically like a project manager. So I knew how to manage a project, and I knew how to kind of put a project together. I wasn't still too sure about the financial side. So I teamed up with these guys that were putting a project together, and they wanted me to run the project for them, to be the developer kind of, but to be a development manager rather than having any kind of financial role in the deal. So I said to them, okay, grand. And I can remember thinking to myself, these guys are going to make a few quid on this. So I want to earn some money. So I said, okay, give me 5 grand a month. So going from where I was, I thought 5 grand a month, that's fabulous. Like, it's a nice few quid. I'll run the job, and I'll also learn how to do this job from them. And then after a couple of months, I started to see the numbers and stuff that these guys were going to put like a 2 million profit into their pocket or something. I remember thinking, 65 grand. I thought I was doing really well. Like, these guys are making literally millions. Like, and that was a real eye opener. And that's
how old were you at the time, Gavin?
Sorry?
How old were you at this time?
I was probably around 26, 27, something like that. So it was an early part. I mean, it wasn't too young, but it was an early stage. And when I saw what they were making, I was suddenly went, hold on a second, I have really got to learn this business, because I had no idea this was the kind of money that you could make. And so the next project that I did was it was basically like a shop unit in this neighborhood center. And it was a huge, big shop unit. It was way too big. The builder that built it didn't have any idea what size shop units should be. And he just built like whatever would have been apartments. He just turned it into one big shop unit. And I can remember buying this. I can't remember exactly the price now, looking back at it. It was probably around 750 or something like that. And I can remember buying it for 750 off this guy. And he was only delighted to get rid of it. He wanted to sell apartments. He didn't give a damn about shops on the ground floor and all that kind of stuff. And he was just literally built it because the planning permission required that there was retail on the ground. So he sold it to me. And the first thing I did was went off and tried to find a tenant for this big, big unit. And I couldn't find any tenant that would pay anything near what I thought it was worth. And so I was speaking to an agent. The agent said, you got to go and subdivide the thing. It's like, it's way too big. Turn that into 3 separate units instead. So I went off, got my planning permission for that, built up a wall, put in the drainage for each 3 units, put in power for each 3 units, whereas it had all been designed just for one. And suddenly I could find tenants. The tenants would pay much, much more for the smaller unit than one guy would pay for the whole unit. And so I put 3 tenants into the 3 properties. It took me maybe a year in total from start to finish. And I sold that property for about 1.7 million. And so I made $1 million profit right away there and then. I remember just thinking, wow, this is serious stuff. And I went and did that again, kind of multiple times, and kept on doing it. And I just thought, wow, I figured out like the monopoly, like how to just keep on making money. This is easy. And that's when the kind of complacency starts creeping in. And I sort of, you have more money burning a hole in your pocket, and you start looking at all sorts of stuff left, right, and center.
It's so interesting to see that you're talking about like an inflection point when you realize how much other people are making. And I think everyone has that in their career at some stage where you're doing, and you think you're doing great. You're like, this is actually not bad. This is good money. Like, I've got a kind of nice kind of Ford that I bought and everything like that. Everything's going great, and look, I'm doing better than these guys over here that I know or whatever. So there's all the kind of different levels of the game. And then the day that you find out that the guy sitting beside you, or maybe guy that you might be working for, what they're getting out of the deal, and you're like, what?
Yeah.
I can't do
it. You realize.
Yeah.
And you feel like a mug. Initially, I was like, what? Like, I can't believe I agreed to that fee.
Yeah.
But at the time you got it, you were only delighted. You thought you were over the moon. Like, God, I can't believe they accepted that. And then suddenly the world turns, and you realize, whoa, these guys could have afforded twice that.
It's an interesting.
The mindset, though. The thing is discipline is so important in this game, because it's that exact mindset that causes all the problems later, because you start getting used to the lifestyle. And that's where we were talking about Joe earlier. Like, that's where Joe has done really well, because he kept a lid on that, and the best thing that I could have done would just sort of have had a mentor or somebody to kind of say, Gavin, this is not going to keep going. This is a one-off, or you're in this crazy period that will come to an end with a big bang. And when it comes to an end, everyone's going to be running for the exit. You're not going to be able to sell. You're not going to be doing anything. So start putting that profit into paying down debt. And then, of course, when you're there and you figured it out, and you're kind of thinking, geez, why would I wait for the nice car? I can just have it right now. Do you know what I mean? Why would, because I was into cars as a teenager. So things like Ferraris and all that kind of stuff. Like, oh, wow, I'd love to own one of them. Suddenly you can afford it. So of course you're going to go and buy it. But you need somebody behind you who's kind of saying, hold on a second, this is not normal. You will not continue to do this. And so you do need somebody in your corner kind of tapping you on the shoulder and saying, hold on, you're getting a bit ahead of yourself here. Just kind of calm down. And that's where discipline, that's why my podcast is all about kind of the mindset and discipline and stuff.
And was there any way, like, say, if you're looking back at that period, was there any way to, if you could go back and meet Gavin 2003 or whatever, and say, okay, is there any way to avoid the big crash for you if you're in property, or was there kind of no way to avoid it? Maybe it was good that you had a good time with the Ferraris and stuff like that. And then
I think it was, I've reflected on this long and hard, and I look forward now, but there's basically 3 investments I made that brought the entire show down. And I was doing really, really well. And what it boiled down to was having this outsized kind of vision of my lifestyle. And I did these houses. I built a couple of houses in Foxrock, and they were magnificent. We sold one of them for 4 million. We sold the other one for 4.1 million. And myself and my partner, we decided, why don't we just keep one each, and that will be our homes. And if we keep them as our homes, then when we sell them, there'll be no tax, because it'll be your principal private residence. So that's what I did. Moved into this house. I'm 34, 35 years of age, and it's a massive house, like 7 bedrooms. And I've extended it. I've put a basement down. I had a gym downstairs. I had a wine cellar. I had the whole lot. Went berserk, and the house was fully paid for. Like, there was no debt on it at all. Okay, so I am sorted. Okay, but instead of thinking this is what I'm made now, I'm sorted, there was the original house that we built these 4 houses in was still part of myself and my partner's, assets. And we were saying, what do? We just flog it. And I said, no, I'll buy it and I'll do it up, and then I'll move into that afterwards. And so what I did was went from the 7-bedroom house that I had fully paid off. I doubled down. I paid my partner for his share, and I ended up owing the bank about 1.5 million. And I borrowed that against my own home. Then had to go and do up the house and get permission and all this kind of stuff. So I started borrowing a little bit more to do that. And I ended up with a loan of about 2 million on the house that I had for free. And it was against this property next door it was like a huge old Foxrock mansion. And what I decided to do was, okay, 5,000 square foot's not big enough. I want 8,500 square foot. And so I went in. It was going to be a massive, it was going to be the dream home. And I instead of recognizing that I already had the dream home, I wanted this much, much bigger dream home. And so buying that cost me an absolute fortune. I borrowed about, between all of the jigs and rails, about 3.5 million. And the bank came in and foreclosed on me on that. And they sold it for 750 grand. Unbelievable. And the thing is
yeah,
that was a deal that like I just could not avoid, because at this stage I already had my principal private residence. I couldn't argue with the bank that, well, why don't you let me keep this one as well and run the two together? It was just so much debt all tied up. So that was one of the ones that pulled me down. At the same time, I had an idea that I wanted to have an office in the city centre that I owned outright rather than renting or anything like that. So I bought a Georgian townhouse overlooking the canal on Herbert Place. And I paid 2.4 million for that property. And I thought, okay, again, the architecture, the vision, the lifestyle, I wanted to have this pristine, like restored Georgian townhouse, amazing, in the middle of town, walking distance to everything. And I was going to do a big news house at the back that would be kind of like a pied-à-terre, and I'd have my office and I had all this. So it was going to be amazing. Again, big vision lifestyle. I'm going to be worth 100 million in a couple of years. Of course, this is nothing, And so bought that, and then suddenly the whole market turned, and I'm there with 2.4 million. Bank asked me to sell it. I was saying, but sure, look, the market's collapsed. Why don't we keep it? But it wasn't generating enough income to pay the bills, and so they forced me to sell it. Sold it for 685,000, and it was just painful. So there's 5 million alone thrown in the air and just like let it blow away in the wind, And once I started to do that kind of stuff, I can remember thinking to myself, what a bloody idiot. If I had just sat back, if I hadn't bought that property, if I hadn't bought the big house, I was living in a 7-bedroom, brand new house with a wine cellar and a gym, and I owned it outright. I didn't have any debt. And instead I went off and I borrowed another 5 million to have these two lifestyle things that were going to help me fulfill the vision of my lifestyle. And all I needed to do was, pull back from that. And I would have certainly had 5 million to kind of pay down debt, keep the banks away, keep them at bay. And then the other thing that I did was I got super ambitious with this huge project in Spain. And the reason I moved to Spain was because I saw this deal and I thought to myself, I know I can be, the next, I don't know, whoever, like the Candy Brothers in London or something like that. I can come up with this incredible deal. And so I basically decided that everything I had done so far was a certain scale. This was one I was going after. It was going to be 40 million deal. I had to go and raise 40 million. And then I was going to double the value of it. So it was going to be worth 85 million in a couple of years' time. And in addition to that, I was going to get all of these fees paying me every year. So I was going to have this fantastic lifestyle where I can live in Spain. I've got 500,000 a year coming in income, and I have an asset worth 80 million that I only paid 40 for. So this was a fantastic thing. That actually went completely wallop, every single penny lost. And so it was a disaster. Now, as it turns out, 12 million of that came from investors, me being 3 million of it came from myself. So I put 25% down. I raised 9 million from investors. Then we went off to the bank. We got a bank, the Royal Bank of Scotland, I think it was, in Spain. They said they were going to lend us 30 million. And then when the project was ready to actually pay for, they said no chance, because the crash had happened at that stage. And we weren't able to fulfill certain obligations that we had to. So they had cleaned me out for 800 grand in fees, arrangement fees, non-utilization fees, all of this stuff. They cleaned 800 grand out of me, and then they didn't give me a penny of the money that I had agreed with them. So we lost 12 million, lock, stock, and barrel. The entire 12 million was lost. And so I had, on top of banks in Ireland chasing me for money, I had very unhappy, understandably unhappy investors in Ireland who had funded this project in Spain and were wondering why the 12 million was now worth zero. And so you can see the headaches that I was trying to deal with over about 5 to 10 years.
And those headaches, Mark, this is what I'm thinking about when I'm hearing all these stories. I'm thinking about the type of the money that we're talking about there. It's almost like you're just doing. It's just a different mindset, as in it's the Monopoly game. You're trying to get to the next level of, you could be doing that at 100 grand and trying to shoot for 1 million, but you're trying to shoot for 80 million. It doesn't seem like there's that much difference in what you're doing. You're getting the investors together.
That's kind of what I point out in my own podcast, is that the principles apply all the way up the chain to hundreds of millions. Do you know what I mean? It's no different up at the top than it is at the bottom. And it's funny, I had this very conversation with Joe Doyle a few weeks ago. And the thing is that when you go, and the first, like my salary when I started out as an architect was 16 grand a year. And so that's where I started at. Yeah. And I bought this property for 25 grand and made 100. Like, that was kind of like a monumental amount of money to make. 100 grand, geez, that's incredible. But within 5 or 6 years of that, 2.5 million in 6 weeks was what I was doing. And it conditions you. You keep on just getting a little bit more ambitious and a little bit more ambitious. And the thing to do, my advice to everyone is, as difficult as it is to remain as disciplined as possible so that you can keep those emotions back. Constantly remind yourself that this is a cyclical market and that you might be going through this amazing, period right now. But mark my words, it's going to go through some sort of a massive crash, unexpected. No one's going to see it coming. And then suddenly you're all running for the exit and nobody can get out. And that's when property prices just go down through the floor. My portfolio went from 65 million with 40 million of debt down to, I think it was 24 million. So I was 16 million negative. And it was, my assets were worth 24 and my debt was worth 40. So I was 16 million below the asset value. And it was a total disaster from that point of view. Now, thankfully, it started to come back after a couple of years, but the damage was done, and the income was done. They grabbed the income, they grabbed everything. But when I look back and think to myself, all of the money that I was making, stuff like that, I could have easily chipped away that 40 million debt and brought it down to 30. If I had just been disciplined and if I had stopped living the lifestyle, I could have said, you know what, I can have this 40 million of debt I can pay down. And instead of focusing on lifestyle, just focus on being sensible and knowing that this is this kind of crazy period you're going through. It'll come to an end. And how do you want to be positioned when it does come to an end?
I like that kind of long-term thinking as well. And I think that from now, so that's kind of like that's what brings us up to today. And what type of opportunities are there for a lot of people that are coming up now. And I think that, like, for instance, like when you work in technology in Dublin, you get quite well paid. I say sometimes I tell Mark about some of my people that I know in tech here, and he gets angry. So there's levels to the game in technology in Dublin as well. And so it spins off a lot of cash because I think that all the jobs that we do here, because we have exposure to, like, my job in particular has exposure to all countries in Europe. So my job sucks in money from all of these different territories. That's why those types of jobs do well, right?
Yeah.
But so what do people do with these? Like, a lot of my friends in different. So I know people all over the kind of tech spectrum in Dublin, and a lot of my friends, they're really good at their job, but they're not good at investors. They have no experience of that. I know one guy in particular. I went for a walk with him recently, and he works for a different tech company. I won't say who, but he's been working there for a few years, and he has say 400 or 500 grand in stock in one stock there. Right, I'm thinking that's pretty risky to, if something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
The thing is you got to understand that the people who go on to become billionaires usually have the concentration of wealth in one stock or one asset class. And it's highly risky, but it's also can be highly rewarding. And in my case, that's what I was doing. I was gambling massively. I was betting all on red or betting all on black, as opposed to being more cautious, spreading out your bets. Like if I had spread out my bets and said, okay, I'm gonna put a little bit in stocks, a little bit in bonds, a little bit in this, I wouldn't have gone anywhere near the money that I had made, but I probably would have been much more secure and safer. And also the lifestyle wouldn't go mad because I wouldn't have been able to have that lifestyle. And so there's a certain amount of realization. If you're going to play that game of chess or gambling, basically is what it is. If you're going to play that game, you've got to be so disciplined. This is why Warren Buffett is so successful, because he's incredibly disciplined. He doesn't care what the market's doing. He just buys because the value says that it's a good deal. Whereas everyone else is getting caught up in, oh my God, Bitcoin, this, they're all like frothing at the mouth when it's frothy. And then as soon as people start saying, no, get out of it, and they're all running for the door. They haven't made up their own mind. They're just going with the herd, and I think that's a big risk.
So in that case, these guys, so say there's literally thousands of people that are working in that area in Dublin, and they might all have a certain amount of stock or a certain amount of kind of wealth that they've generated there, kind of almost as a byproduct of what they do for a living, which is great, right? When I talk to these people, a lot of them don't know what to do with that money. So they're investing in ETFs or whatever, or and they're the income, they double their money kind of every 10 years or so, give or take, and that's the go-to. But say if those people wanted to get going and have some kind of real assets and real estate, but to get going, or they just buy one apartment, or should they pool their money? What would be your advice to kind of a group of tech guys who have I don't know, like 600,000 or 700,000 in their stock portfolios, and they want to take some of that, and would it be just buy a few apartments, or maybe buy like a development project, or give your money to somebody?
I think what you've got to have is one of the reasons that I did quite well back at the time is that I had the development skills, and what I used to do was offer my development services to my friends and my kind of network, as I will do all of the work. You guys invest in the project. So say, for example, the three of us, we would go 33 into the deal. We'd each put a chunk of whatever money we need to get into the deal. And then I would run the project. And the project, my service as running the project would be paid out of the three of us. So I'd be chipping in my own share of my fee, if you know what I mean. And that was a great way to do it, because we would all pool together and we could do an awful lot more with the pooled funds. Now, there was downsides to it with people getting into partnerships and stuff. And when the partnerships go wrong, it's really bad. So you got to do it in companies. And there's all sorts of reasons not to do it in partnerships now. But at the time, it was all the advice regarding tax and stuff was like, oh, do it in a partnership. You pay far less tax. And so that was the advice. I think if I was, you've really got to know what your strengths are if you're going to get into the property business. If you're a person who has absolutely no time at all, if your job is like super intense, as a lot of people have, like solicitors, for example, they work very long hours. They're not great investors if they're going to have to roll up their sleeves and start doing work on a project and like renovate a house or something like that. Buy to let might make a lot of sense in that regard because it's passive. But the reality is there's very little money to be made on the buy to let. Certainly if you buy it in the Dublin area, there's like 3 or 4% yield on your money. It's not really worth it. You're hoping for capital growth. I think the better option is to probably buy a fixer-upper, and you can kind of buy something, you can do it up, you can repair it, you can extend it perhaps, you can kind of tidy it up. What I said that I did back in the early days is stepped into a house, and it was an executor sale. The lady was very elderly who had died, and she left the house to her 5 kids. Kids don't want it, they want to sell it. And I came along, and instead of seeing all of these old sinks and stuff and thinking, oh, geez, it's terribly old fashioned, I was thinking, fantastic, I can rip everything out, start fresh. But that's because I had the mindset, like the architect's kind of design mind. But if you're a person who's super intense in a work, and the last thing you want to do is go to a building site and go, oh, geez, what am I going to do now? You need probably to have in your network somebody that is trustworthy, that can kind of say, look, I know exactly what I'm doing here. I'll roll up my sleeves. I'll do all the work. You guys run the, you guys will own the project with me. I'll take a leg with you, because that way I'm invested in the project.
That's
That's
skin
skin
in
in
the
the game.
Yeah.
Exactly. But we're all chipping towards the value that I create, because I am going to probably add a significant amount of value to the property. I'm not just doing that for a fee. I'm doing that for a bit of a success fee, a bit of a bonus, and I'm also in with my capital to kind of own a piece of the action as well.
It's an interesting one, because it's interesting to say about the buy to let, because I actually, like, I was an accidental landlord. I bought an apartment in Dublin 8, just out of college. We like back then we got it for 8% down. It was crazy, and
Wow, yeah.
we
Not today.
and it was a struggle to scrape together that. But so I actually moved to Canada for a few years, and I was working for a startup there, and I was renting it out. And I thought, this is great. My mortgage is X and the rent is Y, and there's a nice little gap there. But over the 2 years, like after paying everything and fixing things and everything, it really wasn't that much, and it took way more time than I thought it was going to. And if you would have averaged the hours spent on setting it up and working with property manager and all that type of stuff, it really wasn't worth that much. So I think maybe that idea of being a manager of, maybe I'll go around to Mark Baker. What do you think about this? I'll go to my tech friends, like, yeah, let's pool our money and I'll be the manager, and we'll do some fees.
Well, as long as you have the skills, because
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that I had done projects. I'd worked with builders. I knew the whole process, and I'd also gotten like plenty of exposure over a couple of years of renting places, how to find the tenants, how to deal with the legal aspect, because you're always meeting solicitors. I used to spend, I'd say, a third of my time dealing with solicitors, either buying, selling, creating leases, financing loans, shareholder agreements. It's just, cannot avoid that aspect of it. And so you need somebody who's good at that kind of thing. And so I had that mindset to kind of, I look after all that. You guys just keep paying the fee. So I would get a monthly fee, but it would be paid by the partnership, and the partnership would be raising the money from the bank. So you buy something for, say, 500,000, and you say, okay, in order to convert this building or do whatever we're going to do, refurbishment or something, we need 400 grand, and that is going to fund the fees, the architect fees, and all of the various professional fees, including my fee, and it's going to pay for the builder and the work and all that kind of stuff. So you borrow the money, and now that money is going to go out in dribs and drabs to architect, engineer, to myself as the project manager, and you would then do the construction, you do the loans, you do all of the work that needs to be done, and then you'd sell the property, or you'd refinance it and then release yourself back your original investment. And it was a great thing to do. I mean, it was a huge success at the time. I can remember, in my best year, I pulled in $1 million in fees, doing all of that. Now, by that stage, I built up a decent team, so I actually had like a number of mouths to feed in the office. But it was a good business, and I kind of figured the more I grow this, the more deals I get exposure to, the more people that come to me. Instead of me looking for deals, people were coming to me saying, Gavin, you're the guy who's running these projects. We'd like you to come in on this with us. And so I started having that kind of, which was a great way to find more deals.
It's interesting. There's so many different angles when you talk about property. Sometimes I was listening to your podcast, and there was a guy from, I forget his name now. He was from Westport in Mayo, and he talked about kind of buying, like, what would you do if you had no money to do this business? That's a great mindset to have. Say if you had to find someone else's money to do this. There's so many different angles when you're talking about property. But if you were starting from scratch, and you're saying, okay, I want to get into property, what would be your move? Would you go into commercial? Would you go into like the kind of renovation projects? What do you think would be where would you start if you're...
Well, starting today, it's funny, I had a coaching call this morning with a lady down in Waterford, and she's actually, she's getting into the game herself. And I mean, the thing is if you go outside of the Dublin area, there's actually great yield to be got on properties. And so she's buying stuff for 140 grand, and she's getting kind of 1,600 a month in rent, or 1,500 a month in rent. So it's immediately thrown off more than 10% cash, which is great if you consider we're in negative interest rates pretty much, Yeah. So from that point of view, I would definitely go outside of the city, or if you're knowledgeable enough to do it, get into house building, because we're a nation that just cannot supply the amount of houses that we need, and therefore they're always going to be in demand. And so I do think house building, that's something that the family business I'm in, we have a commercial division and we have a house building division, and the focus is very much on the house building division now, because that's where the action is. And you can either sell the property or you can rent it. And there's all sorts of ways to finance it as well. Now you've got the funds are coming in. Of course, it's a dirty word to say, but the funds are trying to buy up blocks of apartments and stuff like that. And so instead of having to sell it off to 20 or 30 different individuals, you can just sell it to one fund who wants the whole thing lock, stock, and barrel. And so it's like commercial at the moment is very difficult, because with the exception of, say, warehouses have been extremely resilient and have weathered the whole pandemic well. But restaurants, hotels, bars, they've all basically been shut down for the last year. Office buildings, most people are working from home at the moment. They will come back, but they've gone through a pretty difficult time. So I wouldn't be piling to commercial, except that you've got a long-term kind of vision and you're kind of thinking about it and you're saying, okay, where is the puck going to be? To quote Wayne Gretzky in the old ice hockey kind of stuff, is, there's technology is coming on stream. If you think about the high street, every single town up and down the country has got a high street, and that's been terribly damaged by the pandemic, and everyone is buying in the big. But I do think the high street will come back, and the question is, what will it come back as? It might be reconfigured slightly. But I live in the Blackrock area in Dublin, and there are 3 cafes in Blackrock, and you go down on a Saturday or a Sunday, and there are lines around the block to queuing up to get themselves a coffee, a scone, a sandwich, whatever it is that these guys do, and they're minting it, Yeah. And in the same street, there's a Costa and there's a Starbucks. Nobody queuing near it. It seems like the artisan kind of privately owned stuff is where it's all at now, But as a landlord, you'd be there saying, oh, I'd much prefer the Starbucks because it's the big corporation, paying me the rent instead of the mom and pop store or whatever. So you have to kind of think forward a couple of years and say, okay, what's the future hold? How's technology going to change this? There's things like ghost kitchens, which are kind of going to become a bigger thing now. You've got the micro mobility, scooters, electric bikes. All of that is changing the way we do things. You're going to have Uber and these kind of automation cars. Automated cars sounds very far-fetched, but it's not that far away. And in Las Vegas, there's a taxi company that has now done 75,000 miles in fully autonomous mode. Now it has a driver sitting there in case, but the car has driven autonomously 75,000 miles now at this stage. So it is coming, and you have to kind of think to yourself, okay, where do I want to be when all of this happens, and how can I put myself? But until I get there, housing does seem like a pretty safe bet.
Okay, and it's interesting that you talk about that, because I was thinking about this recently in my own career. All the big moves that I've made have been around innovation and good ideas that I had, and how much of a week do I spend putting some time into just thinking about where's the business going, what are we going to be doing 5 years from now? Like, it's very, very little. You get kind of bogged down in the day to day very quickly, and then it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and all your best energy is spent, right? So I'm trying to build in a part of the week where I'm thinking about bigger picture stuff, and it's more enjoyable work to do anyway. But Gavin, listen, I know we're trying to keep it under 45 minutes. We blew right through that. That's the
no problem.
Well,
just on the point you made there, I would say that it's a good habit to get into is maybe a day a month, block out the entire day as a kind of, call it your vision day, and don't go to the office. Go to cafe or someplace where you're away from the distraction, and just bring like a notebook or something and do that brainstorm where you're kind of thinking, okay, how can I be innovative? Where are things changing? And like map out the next couple of years. Try to do that once a month, because you'll figure out something along that period. You'll never do it in an hour sitting at your desk. between meetings and stuff like that. It just doesn't happen. You got to block it out for a whole day and just like really brainstorm the whole thing.
I think that it's the vision quest. I think we'll call that day, Mark. We might do that together once a month. We can get together. I think. Gavin, we do have a bit of a tradition on the podcast. I know we're pushing time, Mark, but what's the lightning round that we usually run? What's the 3 or 4 burning questions you've got for Gavin here?
Okay, where do we start? Okay, is it who you know or is it what you know?
It's funny you say that. I actually think it's who knows you, and that's a big thing. I mean, what you know is obviously very important. Who you know is very important, but when people know what you're doing and what you're about, they come to you, and so opportunities come your way because you know stuff. People come your way because they know that you know stuff, and so I think it's actually you flip that on your head, and it's what people know about you and your skills and so that's one of the reasons why I'm kind of prolific now in the podcast, on my YouTube channel, all of that kind of stuff. I try to put as much stuff out there so that people kind of see me as an authority in this space, and people reach out because of that.
It definitely works. We actually had that answer once already.
Important, yeah. So
Rob Cullen.
I mean, who you know and what you know, it's all part of the same thing, but who knows you is another aspect of that you need to keep in mind.
Okay.
I was going to say just on that point as well. I remember you had Daniel Priestley on the podcast.
Daniel, yeah, great guy. Yeah, he knows how to do it.
I got that book, Key Person of Influence. I think it was an amazing book. It was like a 200-page. You could blow right through it, but it's really like how many people are. So I think I talked to Mark about this as well. Like, but it's all about kind of being that person of in that space, owning that. So many people this is what I always think. So many people on LinkedIn are sharing posts, but very little people are actually producing the content, and that's the people that are.
Yeah, Daniel is a fantastic example of that. I went to London once a month to actually go and attend Daniel's. It's called the KPI Accelerator. And it's Key Person of Influence, and it takes basically all the content in that book, but it goes into it's basically a workshop once a month, with all of the accountability of being surrounded by like-minded people. It was absolutely fantastic. And when I came out of that, that's when I started to produce the content that you're now kind of like you guys have found me through my podcast. It's all because of that KPI thing that I did with Daniel.
Amazing. Anyway, sorry, I kind of stepped on Mark there. What was the next question, Mark?
No, this is a new one actually that I just thought of based on a lot of people have kind of recommendations. You see it online, but they haven't actually like habits and routines, but they haven't actually done anything, and they might still be 21 years of age. You've kind of come through it all. So I'm kind of interested to ask you, do you have now, based on what you've been through, do you have any daily habits or routines that you think work for you?
Yes, very much so. And lo and behold, if I don't do them, first thing, I get up early every day, 7 days a week. I don't have a weekend schedule. I get up at 5 every morning, 7 days a week. When I get up, I go down, and the first thing I do, hit the kettle, make a nice cup of tea, and like a herbal tea or something like that. And I do a meditation for 10 to 15 minutes. And that I use one of the meditation apps. And it's a great way to just kind of like get yourself grounded. And then I take out a notebook and I write, and it's kind of like what we're talking about, vision and all that kind of stuff. I usually reflect on yesterday, how I showed up, was there anything that I need to kind of work on to improve? Like I have I used to be completely fixated on just property and making money. And if you live like that, you end up with a very skewed life. You end up with all the money is in one corner, and all the other aspects of your life are kind of, suffering. So whether that be your family, whether that be your health, whether that be, your feeling that you're contributing to the world and whatever, all of that stuff, that's kind of, if you think about a circle, and so I kind of think about the circle, and I think about those other areas, and I so make sure that I'm not getting too focused in one, so that you have that rounded. Because success is, the problem with the way the world works these days is that people see somebody driving a Lamborghini and they think, oh, success, that's success. But that guy might not speak to his wife. His kids might have disowned him. You know what I mean? That's not success if you know that other aspect of his life, but you only see the outside. And that's one of the reasons why I kind of, I talk to people about just stay focused on what you can control around your life. Don't be looking at others and comparing yourself with them, because you have no idea what's going on behind closed doors. You might have a guy that's, all over the place. Financially he's doing great, but like mentally he's in a dark place. He's unhappy. His health is in the toilet. All of that kind of stuff. So I do that, and then I hit the road and I do either a run or I do some exercise. I try to do burpees. I like to do lots and lots of burpees, and that's kind of like I have a love-hate relationship with them, and I try to do 1,000 burpees in a single session once a year for my birthday, and I do 1,000 burpees plus my age, and so last year I did 1,048 burpees in a single go, and it takes a bit of training to get up to that, to the ability to do that in a single go, and so I just like keeping fit. And I like to I think that a fit body is a fit mind. And so I can weather the resilience. In fact, going through all of the troubles that I had and stuff like that, I put a lot of it down to surviving that is down to my health and fitness and my focus on just being the fittest version of myself.
Very good. I think underpinning all that seems to be discipline. I think that seems to be really, really important.
Yeah, two things, discipline and patience. Those are the two things that you need to reinforce in your mind. You need the discipline, but you also need the patience. Like you need the discipline to see it out long term. If you think you're going to get results in 6 weeks, I'm trying to build a YouTube channel at the moment, and I've put out a couple of videos and they've been really popular, but I've got a couple of hundred subscribers. I don't have millions of views. And I was speaking with a guy called Paddy Gallagher, and Paddy is one of the top YouTube consultants in the world. He's an Irish guy, and he's only in his 20s. But he's really smart, and he's advising some of the biggest YouTubers on the planet. And we were chatting last week. I had a consultation with him, and he was just saying, it's like it's consistency. It's like putting it out regularly, week after week, and it is not an overnight. You're not going to get the viral hit. It's going to be a slow, over a couple of years. That's how you do it. That's the mindset you have to have with property as well. If you think you're going to win it all in one deal, you're probably going to end up going wallop.
That's what I often think about when I think about property as well, like the turnaround. Like even so, I live in Greystones, and there's all these property developments that are happening here, and I'm sure they do it. Like the builders are doing very well out of them because the prices are. Like I thought when I got this house, I thought I'm a gobshite. I got this at the very top. There's no way anyone's going to pay anything more than
then they come along.
Emotional purchase. You know what I mean? Like, and my wife was there and everything. Like then they brought us in all the signature. I remember signing for it. I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to pay for this, but
Being there, yeah.
Then they just keep going up and up around here. But since I moved in here 3 years ago, there's a big project going on behind me that it's kind of just finishing now. It's years and years in the future. And when you work in technology, especially when you work in a sales environment like us, it's monthly targets. You only see 30 days ahead, which I think skews. I don't know if it might be a good thing in a fast changing industry, but I often think if we had like yearly targets, I don't know what we could do. Do you know what I mean? We could really plan out.
Yeah.
But
it's a totally different mindset. By the way, we just built a couple of houses in Dalgany, so it's
oh really?
Yeah, a little project called Ashcroft, and we've sold them all now. So it was a nice project, and I actually considered moving out myself because it's a nice part of the world out there.
It's kind of sucks you in around here. Everyone, like, if you like running and swimming and cycling,
that's it. That's why I actually quite liked. I kind of started thinking to myself, yeah, I could live out here.
I blame the happy pair twins.
Yeah, the happy pair. Yeah,
we've had Steven on the podcast as well. I see him running around in his jean shorts. He's living the dream, and we support him completely.
Okay. Last one. Last one. If you could advise somebody to learn one skill, what would it be?
Oh, that's a difficult one. One skill, because there's so many skill sets needed. I guess probably the most important skill is delegation, because any scale that you want to build up to is not going to be done by yourself. You have got to learn And it's actually a weakness of mine. I'm not particularly good at delegating. And, if you want to grow your business to a certain size, you can do all of that yourself. You can be, the man who does every single aspect, the guy that just does every odd job, and you can do it all and you can do it fine. But if you want to grow and scale your business, the only way you're going to do that is with a team around you. And so that is a skill in itself, like the ability to manage a team and to delegate effectively and to keep everyone motivated, everyone kind of going and delivering on targets, all that. That is a real skill that, because, we call ourselves I call myself kind of a master of nothing, but a practitioner of everything, because I can do all of the aspects of the project, and that's, I suppose, what makes me an effective project manager, is that I can do them all. But I was not great at the actual delegation side, where I give the job to somebody else, and that's where I probably ran into a couple of difficulties. I think it was probably my own fault because I didn't delegate effectively.
It's like that piece of advice was aimed directly at me, so I acknowledge that.
Mark needs to let go. But one more question, Gavin, before you go: would you prefer a SharkPod T-shirt or a SharkPod mug?
If you have medium, I'll take a T-shirt.
We will get that out to you as soon as we can. Gavin J. Gallagher, thanks very much for coming on the podcast. Where can people learn more about you, find out about what's going on?
You can find, I've got a website called gavinjgallagher.com, and I have a YouTube channel by exactly the same name, Gavin J. Gallagher. And then with social media, Gavin J. Gallagher for pretty much everything. So you can find me pretty much anywhere. But I have my own podcast, obviously, called Behind the Facade, and that's where I give like this kind of 1 hour talk once a week, either with a guest or by myself. And the guests recently have been quite good, and including Joe Doyle and various people. And there was actually one that you guys might be interested in. There was a chap called Galen Bales, and Galen scaled a business up to about 500 million in value when he was still in his 20s, just out of college. And incredible story. So you should listen to that one.
Absolutely. Okay, it's a great tip, and we'll put all that in the show notes. Gavin, thanks very much for joining us on the SharkPod tonight.
My pleasure, guys. I look forward to listening to the podcast when it's out there.
Thanks, Gavin.
And we're